Hopefully we are. Should be. I am Drew Badger, the founder of EnglishAnyone.com and the English Fluency Guide. Welcome to another live video here on YouTube. Today we're going to be talking about why English learning is random, or it feels random for a lot of people, and how to make it the opposite. What we're really looking for is consistent progress where we know why we're improving, we know how to do it, and everything just gets a lot easier as a result. I will keep my eye on the chat as usual, but this shouldn't be that complicated of a video, but hopefully it will answer quite a few questions that people have, especially about what kinds of things people should be doing to learn. But hopefully I think we should have people on here. I'll keep my eye, as I mentioned, on chat. Nice to see you there, George. Early, or actually on time, I guess, as usual. Mustafa, nice to see you there. Mike, it's been a while. Hopefully you're doing well. But let's get into it. As usual, again, I mentioned I will keep my eye on the chat. I have a new whiteboard over here. Let me see if I can zoom out a little bit. All right, I think this should be okay. All right, I'm excited about this video. Let me take this shirt off too. All right. Hopefully everybody is enjoying the start to 2026. Feels already getting into the year. We're halfway through the month. All right, nice to see you there. Happy New Year. Happy New Year. All right, so I often get lots of questions from learners about things like, should I do X method? Like, should I listen to podcasts? Or even quite specific questions like, what did somebody ask me recently? They were talking about, I don't know, watching something with subtitles on and then like taking notes, or it was like a pretty specific thing they had heard from someone. So I really want to make this clear for everyone, as I do in my book. I know not everyone has my book, The Strangest Fluency Secret. If you would like it though, you can get that in the description below this video. But what I'll be talking about here is basically the core idea, or one of the main ideas really, of the book. And so I want to just give you a very simple diagram of what people are usually doing for learning and why learning can often feel unstable, or it's random, unpredictable. You might have a different way of describing it, but let me know if that's actually a problem for you. It's not necessarily a problem for me now that I know how to learn as a learner of Japanese, but I know for a lot of English learners it is. And so what usually happens is people will try different things. They will try various methods, often for years. Some of them will work, some of them will not, but they don't understand why. And if you don't know what is working, then it's going to be more difficult for you to keep doing what's working and to stop doing what's not working. Now, I remember I didn't put this in the book, but I was thinking about it. There's an old psychology experiment where there is a pigeon. I think it was a pigeon in a cage like this, and the pigeon got food. So I will put the pigeon in there. Here we go. That's kind of a pigeon. We'll imagine that's a pigeon. So there's a pigeon in a cage, and the pigeon gets food randomly. So randomly just given food, but the pigeon doesn't know that it's random. And so the pigeon is trying to do all these different things, like move this way or flap its wings or do something like that to try to get the food to come out predictably. And of course, most people would like to have some kind of predictable progress. You know, that's why we check the weather report or want to know if we're going the right direction when we're going on a trip. You know, people want to know they're not wasting their time. And so this is an interesting thing where the pigeon would be trying to do all of this stuff, even though none of it really made any difference because the food was just given to the pigeon randomly anyway. So I don't want to be learning randomly as a learner of Japanese. You probably don't want to be learning randomly either as an English learner, but hopefully this will make more sense. So let's erase our pigeon here. And so to answer lots of questions here about particular methods, but if you have questions about, whatever the method might be, let me know. But basically we have two things here. So the first thing is whatever particular method you might be doing, we'll put this in this outer ring of the circle here. So we could call that, you could have reading, write, flashcards, listening, whatever the thing is. And this is anything you might think of doing. So these are the things that you do out here. So whatever that happens to be. So it doesn't matter. You can pick any method, whatever it is, whether you like listening, or you can get more specific, like listening to podcasts or watching movies or TV shows or watching English learning content like this on YouTube or other lessons. All of these are particular things that you can do to learn the language. And what's interesting is that a lot of them can help you learn and help you speak. But when you understand why something actually helps you speak, then here I'll put the word random. So random is the opposite of predictable there. So random, like we don't know, what people should be doing, but this just means you're trying things and you don't know what's actually working. So anyway, we've got different things that we're trying to do, and sometimes they work, sometimes they do not. That's the point. And if you try things just like that pigeon in the cage, you try listening, and sometimes listening works, but sometimes listening doesn't work. And you wonder, why is that? Why would learning not work all the time the same way? And it's useful and certainly predictable for people to want to have a particular method that works. And so for language learning, people say, okay, you have to learn with stories, or you have to learn with listening or podcasts, or again, whatever it is you think you're doing. Now, again, all of those things can help you understand and even speak, but often what we find is that they don't always work. Okay? And so right now, again, we're talking about random progress. I'll just make that very clear here. So people experience random progress, like sometimes they improve, sometimes they don't, and they don't understand why. I'm not talking about when people are speaking and you get random examples of people saying things, because I guess conversations themselves are random in the sense that you don't know what other people will say, and that's actually a big part of the book and why it's difficult for people to get into conversations and to prepare for them, because rather than being random, the better word would actually be unpredictable, and then I talk about that in chapter 7 of the book, which is coming soon. But anyway, that's a kind of a separate topic. But again, we've got these various things that people can be doing, and sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. But what we're really looking for is this thing here in the middle. And so what happens is we're kind of touching this thing in the middle sometimes, and sometimes not. And that's why the learning feels unpredictable. And this thing in the middle is certainty. And I'll just make this very clear, but it's feeling sure about what you want to say. So this thing in the middle here, that's the thing we're really after. And so when you listen to a story, what we're looking for is some kind of lesson or information that helps us feel sure, or another way to think about this is you're left with no doubt or no questions about the language. And so if we feel sure about using something, like I learn a new phrase from a TV show, but I don't understand how to say it. Or I hear something from ChatGPT and I still don't know, maybe I learn a grammar rule, ChatGPT is trying to explain something to me, but I don't quite understand it and still don't feel comfortable using that grammar in a conversation. And that's really the difference here. So when we're learning something, you will feel this, like when you're learning something new, you can think of it as a timeline here. You start learning something and at first you don't feel confident about using it because you're not sure about what it means or how to pronounce it or anything like that. You've got basically different questions or uncertainty in your mind about how to do something. And so as you're learning more and more, hopefully you get to the point where, now we finally feel sure, all the questions are gone, and now that's the point where we can actually speak because we don't feel nervous about something. Now, this is different than just hearing a word and repeating it back to a teacher. I'm not just talking about vocalizing, like saying something. I'm talking about actually feeling confident about using something in a real situation because you feel certain about using it. And so again, feeling sure, the certainty, that's the thing we're looking for. And so what actually happens when people are learning languages is they will try a particular method. Sometimes that method will provide certainty and sometimes it will not. And so when learners are looking for this, it's kind of the connection here between the particular thing they do and whether that provides them with certainty or not. So, for example, you could study a grammar rule and a textbook, and maybe that makes you feel sure about using it. So you have a textbook, you learn some grammar rule, and you think, okay, this makes sense. I understand how to use it. And so you gain certainty, you feel sure, you have no questions or doubts, and that's what lets you speak. So you're reading a textbook, you start learning things, maybe you get a few examples or some explanation that helps you understand it, your questions are gone, and boom, now we've unlocked the ability to speak. And so within a particular word or phrase or grammar point or pronunciation or whatever, you have this same pattern that repeats where you begin not knowing the thing, feeling unsure about using it until you get to the point where you do feel sure, and that can happen very quickly for some things or it can take a long time for others, but that's basically what happens. When you get to this point, that's the thing we're looking for. It's not the method itself that provides the certainty because sometimes they do, sometimes they do not. And this is why when I teach, sometimes I will tell a story, sometimes I will just explain something, sometimes I will give a contrast or something like that, because I'm not thinking about a particular method. I'm thinking about what actually delivers certainty. So you feel confident about using what you learn. Okay, so when you're thinking about learning different languages, or not languages, whatever languages you're learning, but when you're thinking about like what method should I use, the real question is, for the particular thing I'm learning, does it help me if I get a story to answer that, or could I maybe just have a simple visual example or whatever? There could be lots of different ways, and even these things might work together. So for example, like right now, I might explain something, but then tell a story, but then show a visual example of how something works. And if people have questions about specific things with the language that they have trouble with, like you still feel unsure about something, let me know so I can get you to the point where you feel sure about using it. But all I'm really trying to do is remove any questions or doubts you have so you get to certainty. That's what we're really looking for. So the reason random kind of learning happens, or people feel like they're making progress sometimes and sometimes they're not, is because often they're doing things that are not making them feel sure. So this is why you get a lot of people who collect more information, they learn more vocabulary, they understand more over time, but they still feel unsure about speaking, because even one little doubt about something can make you hesitate or stop speaking, or wonder if you're saying the right thing. You worry about mistakes, or you have to translate in your head, or any of those things that can stop you when you're trying to speak. But this is exactly what we're looking at. So I can go into more detail if people need, but let me go back and check chat to see if I have any questions that need answering. But it really is a very basic idea. So when people say, Drew, what method should I be using? The thing I talk about in my book, there actually is a kind of a way, an action you can do that it really doesn't matter what you're trying to learn, it will deliver certainty, because that's the whole point. What I'm trying to do is show you how to do this by yourself. That's what I do in the book. So in programs like Fluent for Life, what I'm doing is choosing what I think is the best thing to deliver certainty for the particular thing I'm teaching. For example, if I'm trying to teach people phrasal verbs, I can show that contrast visually very easily and lead people in steps to understanding some physical thing, like I'm talking about like this marker falling over versus falling down. I can show you the difference between those two things. And when you understand the physical uses of those, then we can learn the more figurative uses that are a little bit more complicated, but still quite easy to understand if you know why we're using them. But again, the whole idea here is not to focus on particular methods, even though maybe some methods in general are more productive than others. But again, the point is, are you getting certainty from the particular thing you're doing? That's what we're after. All right. So I knew that would be pretty quick, but let me go back and check chat, see if I have any questions that I missed. Let's see. Julian, nice to see you there. I'm here again. Happy New Year. Julian says, I am currently focusing on mastering phrasal verbs. Oh, look at that. I just mentioned that. They are among the most challenging aspects of English language. So I make it a point to practice with an AI every day. Okay, so we can put AI over here. And again, when people think about, here's the thing I want to learn, like I want to learn phrasal verbs, and then they have a particular way they're trying to do that. You could learn phrasal verbs with stories. You could get a bunch of examples in a textbook. You could listen to someone describe phrasal verbs in a video like this, something like that. You could ask AI to explain things like this to you. Depending on what kind of AI you're using or how AI is actually teaching you, I have no idea, but you can feel if a particular thing is making you certain because you can speak. So if you know if something is working, like let's say you're learning phrasal verbs with AI. If it teaches you something and you feel, oh, I actually understand this and now I can use it. So I start learning some new phrasal verb. I'm unsure about it at first. The chat GPT or whatever makes that clear for me, and now I feel sure about using it. If that's working for you, then AI in that case is delivering certainty. It's making you feel sure, and you know it is because you're actually able to use something. Remember, you become able to use something when your questions disappear. It is possible, of course, to try to speak when you don't feel sure, but most people don't want to do that. Obviously, they don't want to make mistakes in front of other people. It can be embarrassing and frustrating, and this really is just a practical issue. If I'm trying to learn Russian, for example, and I don't know how to say something, then I just can't say it. It's like a yes or no question. Either I feel able to say something or I do not. And so usually I'm unable to say something because I still have some kind of question or misunderstanding or something like that that's stopping me from feeling sure about using it. So again, this feeling sure point here, that's what we're really looking for. So the problem is not like, does AI help you learn phrasal verbs well? Some people might use AI to learn phrasal verbs and actually feel sure about them because they get good examples or they know how to use AI well, or the kinds of prompts that would give you better results or better explanations. And other people might do the same thing but get worse results. So for example, someone else might be using AI to try to learn phrasal verbs but still not understand them. And so again, the problem is not AI or phrasal verbs, it's just, is the thing you're doing giving you certainty? Okay? So as you learn something, you should be erasing specific questions you have, feeling more confident that you can actually use something, and then you hit a point where you can actually feel, now I've got it, I know how to use this, and I feel comfortable saying this in a conversation. That's what we're looking for. So for me, like AI would be a less useful way to learn phrasal verbs because unless it's something that that I can see easily, like AI is somehow providing images, which it could, if you're paying for a service that maybe is able to generate images and show you how things work. But text descriptions, if that's what you're getting, are often less useful because they're not just showing you how something works. And as I mentioned before about phrasal verbs, it's a lot easier to see simple contrasts visually. That's why I made a whole program called the Visual Guide to Phrasal Verbs, because it's much easier to understand it that way rather than getting a list of these things or trying to get a text explanation of something. So if phrasal verbs, for example, are coming in text with translations and you're trying to memorize them, phrasal verbs only seem frustrating. And this is, again, people think, well, phrasal verbs are actually a very frustrating part of the language. But if you're a native speaker and you learn the phrasal verbs visually, they're not frustrating at all. And that's why phrasal verbs are one of the most commonly used parts of the language, and also one of the things that children learn first for being able to express more complicated ideas, because it's a lot easier to take some simple words and combine them together in different ways and then give children a much more useful vocabulary so they understand their own words better and they know how to combine those words to make more complicated ideas. So again, if you're asking like, is AI a good way to learn phrasal verbs or whatever the thing is, the real question is, do you feel sure about using them as you learn? That's really the only important question for being able to learn if your goal is speaking. All right, let me know if that makes sense. But that's basically the idea. So you can think about any particular thing you might want to learn, but a lot of people, again, are spending time doing things and maybe getting results sometimes. So they are learning things and maybe they're able to say some things, but other things they are not. And they often wonder why that is, because there doesn't seem to be a pattern here that makes sense. But there actually is a pattern if you're looking for it. And that's, does it actually make you feel sure about using what you're learning or not? All right, MD says, oh, wow, good teaching. Glad to hear it. Yes, some people use random slang. Okay, we got a new, just Francisco was asking about that. All right, MD says, can you ask me a question? Can you ask me a question? My new favorite teacher, I'm very date focused, only English, but my listening is good, but my biggest problem, speak. Please tell me advice. Okay, so that's again what exactly I'm doing in this video. So let's say this thing over here you're doing, or actually we've got it up here. So listening. So people talk about this a lot, like their listening improves, and usually their listening is better than their speaking, and that's a very common thing pretty much for everybody. It's almost like this little chart here, but you can imagine the total amount of vocabulary that you can understand, and then here's the total amount of vocabulary you can use. Okay, so this is what you understand, and here's what you actually feel comfortable about using. So the thing is, do you feel sure about what you're using or not? And most people do not. And again, it's not like a random thing. It's just that they're thinking about listening to something, and this is kind of a separate issue here where do you understand something, but can you say it? We're looking at the core problem of, is listening a good way to develop fluency? And really, again, fluency, we can look at fluency within individual words and phrases. So can you feel sure about using this word or this grammar point or whatever? If you can, you are fluent in that thing. You feel sure about using it. And that's really my basic definition for how fluency works. I'm not really thinking about fluency in the language, because you don't need to know every word in a language to speak it. It's just for whatever you want to say, do you feel sure about using that or not? All right. So if you have this problem, and most people do, even really good speakers typically are going to understand more than they can speak. That's like, even people who are fluent native speakers have the same issue. It's not really a problem, but a lot of people will hear vocabulary and maybe they understand it from the context, but they maybe aren't still sure about what the word means, so they would not feel comfortable using it themselves. This is even for native speakers. So this is not like a controversial idea or something that's only a problem or an issue or something that affects learners. It's for everybody, almost everybody, really. I can't think of someone who would actually be able to say more than they can understand. Like, it just wouldn't logically happen. But again, the problem for most people is they listen more, or they're trying to learn things however they're trying to learn, but they don't actually feel certain about that. And so when you're in a conversation, it's easy to follow what other people say, or if you're watching a movie or a TV show, you can easily follow what others say because you don't have to produce the language. You don't have to know what's correct or feel confident about saying something. But when other people speak, you get examples of things and you try to feel a little bit more confident about it. But until you get that certainty for the specific things you want to say, that's why you're going to struggle. Okay? So this is why, again, I repeated this, or I said this already, but this is why people typically understand more English over time as they learn, but because they don't feel sure about using it, their speaking improvement is really slow or not at all happening, and they just feel like they feel very frustrated that they understand more, or like that specific comment about being able to listen and understand, but still not feel sure about speaking. But that's basically it. So people are looking at specific things they're trying to do. They feel more maybe kind of confident. They can listen to things or watch movies or whatever, but they still don't feel sure about speaking. But that's the reason. They don't feel sure even though they are trying things, and sometimes AI can make you feel sure about something. But the problem is it's inconsistent. And we're looking for something that's actually predictable, and that's what I talk about in the book. Because the point is not just to learn the language or to be able to use AI or whatever. And it's interesting that even with AI now, people are still asking me the same questions about how to learn. They still have the same problems with learning. And even when you see like lots of AI products now available where I can talk to AI and then maybe it will correct my English, if I don't actually understand what I'm saying and I don't feel sure about it, it doesn't matter if AI is giving me corrections. There's a difference you feel when someone tells you, don't say this, say that. So there's that situation. And then the other situation is when you actually get insight that helps you understand, oh, now I understand why I should say this thing and not that thing. So getting corrections is not really helping you speak, or it could, but it's not the same thing as actually understanding why you should say one thing versus something else, or really knowing it in the same way a native does, that this is the correct way to speak because you've seen many examples of it. That's still kind of like a lower level, but when you have that insight about, now I understand why this works, you actually feel this moment happen. And so you go from understanding something to being able to use it, okay? So if you listen a lot, you can understand things. Like I'm just reading that comment and you can see the errors in there mean that you actually don't understand the language as well as you think you do. So it's easy to follow other people speaking because you don't have to think about the grammar and what words are correct or whatever. And that's why you have this issue where you can understand a lot, but you still only feel sure about using a small amount of that vocabulary. All right, let's press on here. All right, maybe grammar sentences using this method can help me, as he is saying. Again, like when we're talking about grammar, you can put any method you think about learning up here. I want to listen to stories. I want to listen to podcasts, watch TV shows, study grammar. I'm not saying any of those things are good or bad. What I'm saying is often you will find, so this is the problem that learners experience, is that they're inconsistent. And sometimes a grammar explanation might make you feel sure. Sometimes it won't. So I might try to study one grammar thing and I get to here where I'm still unsure. I know a grammar point. I can understand it when somebody else uses it, but I'm still not quite sure about using that myself. And so this is not about the whole language. This is just about a specific grammar point or a grammar tense or a particular word or phrase. And so when you think about basically becoming sure or feeling sure or getting sure, feeling certain, and again, the other way to think about this is you have no questions about learning. So when you're trying to say something, if you feel unsure about it, you're going to get stuck. Now, I mentioned this in an email to subscribers recently, but I'll just tell you a quick story that demonstrates this point about feeling stuck in the moment. But I was recently at a restaurant, and they had these little containers. There was like a little jar with some pickles in it. So I'm here in Nagasaki, Japan. I'm at this restaurant, and I'm getting some curry and rice. That's a very common, popular dish here in Japan. So I've got my bowl of curry here, got some rice on there, and a little pork cutlet on top of that. So I'm eating my katsukare. And I like to get these little red pickles, fukujinsuke, and I put those on my curry. And so what was interesting is I went to the little counter because you can take your own pickles out of this jar. I took the lid off the jar and put the lid down on a tray, and I used these little tongs, so Tong. So a tong, it's just like some little, it's almost like a little wire bendy thing I can use to pull the little pickles out of there. And I put the pickles on my food, and then I go to pick up the jar again, and I look at it and I think, wait a minute, I don't know if this jar is on, like the jar lid is upside down or not. Because both sides of this jar lid look like they have a handle on it. It's almost like if you look at it from the side, like there's one handle over here and there's another one with a slightly different kind of handle on that side. So if you're looking at like the top of the thing, if we turn it, look at it that way, that's what it looks like. And so I'm thinking like, oh no, which one of these is correct? Because I could see little bits of kind of like pickle, kind of juice or residue or whatever on there. And I thought, oh no, I grabbed it the wrong way. And so I look at the table and I'm kind of stuck there because I don't know what to do. Like I thought I just put my hands on the inside or like the underside of the jar. And when I looked at the other containers on the table, those ones had labels on them, like a printed label, like a computer label. So on the top of the jar, it said, this is what it is. And so I looked at my jar lid, and that one had the label on the underside of it. And so I thought, okay, I actually got that wrong. So what happened was somebody else had made this same mistake because the top of the lid looked like the bottom, and they basically looked like the lid was a little bit different, like the little part that you can grab here, the little handle. But when I'm in that moment, I'm stuck because I don't actually know. I'm unable to act in the same way that a person in a conversation is unable to speak if they don't feel sure about something. So certainty is what precedes action, just like certainty is what precedes speech. So learning stuff doesn't make you a good speaker. Learning can give you more information, but until you get certain about that, until you feel sure about using it, that information is just sitting in your brain, basically locked in there. Maybe you can understand it when other people are talking, but if you want to speak, what we're looking at is how to get certainty. And so the whole reason I wrote my book is because I wanted to give people a way to get certainty consistently. This is how we want to do this. We want to know what exactly we should be doing to get certainty, consistency. And so when people are talking about like how exactly do you use AI, that's what I talk about in the book. I actually give specific prompts about how to do that. But again, the point is not whether you should use AI or a textbook or a story or TV show or whatever. It's whether that thing is actually making you feel sure about using the language or not. That's the important point. So if you'd like to learn more about that, that's what I talk about in the book, but you can click on the link in the description to learn more. So I talk about AI and anything else people might be using, but again, I show you how to get this consistently. That's the whole point. All right, let's see here. Let's see. Cambridge English phrasal verbs in use. Yeah, again, like a book or a textbook is a way to learn, but you can answer the question yourself. When I learn something, do I feel sure about using it or not? And it's not just about knowing the words, but how do I pronounce them? How do I use them in different situations? Not only for physical examples, but for figurative ones. Can I understand when people are using more difficult uses of it? Those are all the questions that I answer in the Visual Guide to Phrasal Verbs. And I made that course because, again, it's much easier to understand the phrasal verbs visually by comparing them and seeing how they work rather than just getting a bunch of textbook examples. So you can answer the question yourself. I'm not saying that reading books is a good thing or a bad thing, or AI is a good thing or a bad thing. The point is whether you're using it in a way that actually provides certainty or not. And that's a question, again, you can answer this yourself. If you're learning with something, but you don't feel sure about using it, then you should probably change what you're doing if you want to speak. So for the people who want to get consistent results, that's what I do and show you how to do in the book. All right. Good evening, everyone, says Carlos. Happy New Year. And Manuel says, good afternoon from Nicaragua. Then accordingly to what you're pointing to, how can we achieve the certainty we need to begin to talk in a better way until we get fluency? So again, like the first thing to understand is, yes, like certainty is the thing we're after. And what you learn in the book, and this is the same thing you see in all of my lessons, is that the particular way you might get that depends on the thing you're learning. But when you understand how it works and how the mind is actually wanting to learn, it's a lot easier to get that certainty. And so what I do in typical videos, like I might use a story, I might give you a grammar explanation, but show you how it works, or I might contrast with something else. What you need to do, number one, is get a little bit of sense for that. So now we're actually focusing on certainty rather than thinking about particular methods, and also realizing that maybe a grammar explanation plus a visual example plus something else might work. But the method that I show in the textbook, or not the textbook, but in my book, is naturally varied review. And so that's what people can be using by themselves to basically guarantee certainty about a particular thing. Because what we're doing, number one, is thinking about the target. So what are we trying to learn? And then what kind of naturally varied review we need to get that. But that's exactly what the book shows you how to do. So that's how we can do that consistently without worrying about, okay, should I do, this particular thing versus that? And so certainty is it's not like a vague idea. It's the point at which you actually feel sure about using the language you know. That's it. So I'm not explaining anything new that you don't already feel in conversations. If you have some vocabulary you can understand, but you don't feel sure about using it, that means you're not certain about it. You know it well enough to understand. And so maybe you can hear other people explain something and you understand, you can follow that conversation if they use that word, but you still have some kind of question or misunderstanding or something that's stopping you from using that and feeling confident about expressing yourself with that vocabulary. That's the idea. So it's not like I'm not saying certainty is some magical thing that I just created. This is how people speak. And again, the reason I'm talking about this is because most people are focused on the methods themselves, not whether the method delivers certainty or not. And so we're looking at, number one, this idea, but then how do we do that consistently? That's what we're looking for. So for me, like if you watch my videos, this is video 801 or something like that. And if you wonder how I'm able to consistently deliver, when people have questions about grammar or pronunciation or whatever, I'm able to give them certainty because I'm choosing what I think is the right thing based on the same ideas that I'm using in the book. So if you're trying to do this yourself, that's what the book shows you how to do. For people who would just like me to do it for them, that's what we do in Fluent for Life or the visual guide to phrasal verbs or anything like that, where the program is just delivering the certainty for you. Let's see. DX Sniper says, finally, and News Archive says, should I avoid using phrasal verbs in essays? No. I don't know why you would avoid doing that. I guess it depends on what you're talking about, unless someone tells you not to use them, but phrasal verbs are common in writing as well as speech. All right, what method would you advise? So we would say advise here, not advice, or consider to make learning be more efficient and effective. So that's what naturally varied review is. The point is, and I talk about this in chapter 7 of the book as well, depending on when you're watching this, either it will be out or not. But in chapter 7, we're talking about trying to mirror real life as much as possible in our learning. That way there's not this big gap basically between when you're learning and when you get into the real world and try to speak. So what most people do is they're creating it's basically a preparation gap. That's what I call it, where you learn something, but then the real world is completely different. And people say, hey, I wish everyone spoke as clearly as Drew does, but I'm not speaking as I normally speak in conversations. I'm speaking differently. I'm speaking more clearly. I'm using different vocabulary. I'm pronouncing my words a bit more slowly and more smoothly and clearly so people can understand what I'm saying. But it's a different way of learning. So what we need to do is make sure we mirror the actual experiment or the experience, when people are in real life. And so naturally varied review is a way to do that, where we actually want to get examples of how natives are really communicating. That way we feel sure and we understand when we get into conversations, we feel sure. Because knowing something, like I might get a Cambridge University, book of some list of phrasal verbs or whatever, but I get into a conversation and people use them differently, or they have a different accent, or there could be lots of other kinds of questions that give me that uncertainty. And so if I'm prepared for those things before the conversation, then I feel a lot more sure. Maybe you won't be 100% prepared for everything all the time. I don't know everything in Japanese, but I'm still able to have very good conversations because I'm most of the way prepared, like 99% really, for most conversations. And so if there's anything new I don't know, I can ask about it, or I can, do whatever to close that gap. But it's a much smaller gap than what people typically have to deal with, where they're learning something and then a real conversation feels like a frightening thing because it's so different than what they're doing as they're learning. So it's more than I want to go into detail with or in detail about here in this video, but that's why I wrote the book, so I can take time to lead you through the process. And it actually is very simple, but when you think about, okay, if the problem is certainty, how do we get that consistently? It's not about, okay, here's how you learn everything with AI, because AI, like talking to ChatGPT, is not going to prepare me for real conversations. Like, people don't talk like a chat robot or some kind of text example. And so even if I'm listening to ChatGPT explain something, it's going to be helpful for sure. But when I get into a real conversation and people are blending their words or they have different accents or whatever, ChatGPT is supposed to be clear, just like I'm supposed to be clear for you so you understand what I'm saying. But when I get into a real conversation, like here in Japan, if I walk around, I listen to some young men talking together about stuff in Japanese, it sounds completely different than what you would get in a typical lesson. So that means I need to actually listen to that kind of Japanese before I get into those conversations. So that's the kind of naturally varied review and preparation I need. And again, I don't need to have a person to practice with in order to do it. All of this information is freely available, just like you're able to go and watch things on YouTube right now about anything you'd like and learn and prepare for any situation before it happens. All right. But again, that's the idea. So AI is useful and it can teach you a lot. But again, if it's leaving you with questions about how you use something in a real situation, then it's not giving you certainty. That's the idea. So AI can often answer lots of questions for you, but it's probably not going to prepare you for the wide range of different accents or ways of using the language that people will use in real conversations. But if you'd like to know better ways to do that and how to combine AI with other ways of learning in the same way that I do as a teacher, so even in my own programs, I don't just only do one thing. Like, I don't just think only stories are the best way to teach people, because sometimes a story is not the best way, or it's not the most efficient way to do something, because I'm not thinking about stories or AI or listening or whatever. I'm thinking, how do I get people to certainty as quickly as possible, as consistently as possible? That's how I'm able to get people fluent quickly, because I'm trying to, again, get you to certainty. I want to erase those questions, remove those doubts, and that's when you actually start speaking. All right, Daddy says, hello, the best English teacher, and how are you? I'm doing well. And Demora says, if I pronounce that correctly, yeah, I think I did. Hi, Drew. Even if I understand a new phrasal verb, when you explain, I forget when I need to use it. It depends. Again, like, there's always room for continual use. But if you actually don't understand something, like, I'll just put it this way. The issue you have in a conversation will usually depend on the problem or question you have. So if you have a question about usage, like what a phrasal verb means, then that's different from like how to use it in a particular way for some particular situation. And so if you see more people using examples of phrasal verbs, that would prepare you better for that. And even when you're learning something, even when you feel sure about it, you can still forget a word. That's not, even native speakers will forget things. And that's why it is, again, important to review the vocabulary, but you want to do that in a variety of ways. That's going to be a much more efficient way of preparing you, excuse me, rather than trying to just memorize a whole bunch of things or learn in only one way. So yes, even native speakers like me, sometimes I still forget English words that I like. I feel sure about the vocabulary. That's not the problem, but whatever. Maybe I haven't used something in a while and I feel unsure about, like what is a typical word I want to use, whatever. The difference for me is that when I'm trying to say something, I'm not thinking about typically only one way to do it. And that's part of the moving like water that I talk about in Speak Like Me, or the examples I use in any of my programs. I'm trying to give people more than one way to express themselves, and that's also another form of naturally varied review. So let's say I'm in a conversation and maybe there's a particular phrasal verb or something I want to say. I could express that in a couple of different ways. And so when I'm even teaching my own daughters, so I have two daughters, they are 10 and 7 years old. As I'm teaching them, I will often give them different examples. So for example, we were watching some bowling. I'm going to draw some bad bowling pins over here. Here's the bowling ball. And so I was talking about hitting the pins. So these are the pins over here. So a pin, like this is the actual name for this thing. If you don't know what it is, it's just, you can call it, oh, that white thing with the red stripe on it or whatever. Natives usually are able to find some way to express something to keep the conversation going, even if they don't know the correct specific word for something. But that usually never stops people from being able to keep talking. They will just find some way to express it. And so the actual term for these things, these are called bowling pins. This is the bowling ball over here. But I said you can hit these. So if you hit these, you can also knock them over or knock them down. Same thing. And so when I'm teaching my daughters, I'm giving them a variety, because they will experience a variety of different ways of using these things in real conversations. Or they might be watching a TV show and someone says, oh, the bowler hit the pins. Or someone says, oh, the bowler knocked over, or bowler knocked down some of the pins. And so learners, because they have, and again, I talk about this in chapter 7, the problem of one, where people are essentially thinking about like one correct way to say something. And so if you get stuck, like let's say you're thinking about a phrasal verb and you know it, but maybe you don't have any questions and you just forget it for some reason, say it in a different way. You don't have to get stuck thinking like, okay, I wanted to think about one specific phrasal verb. There's always another way to explain something. And so as you learn in this way, what I talk about in the book, you develop what I call a magnetic vocabulary, which means you can use the vocabulary because you know it so well. So people know they can say hit or knock down or knock over. They understand the difference between these two phrasal verbs or why we would use them. And so instead of like reading in the Cambridge phrase book or whatever, which a lot of people like, and again, I'm not saying like, you could put phrase book up here as a thing. They can be useful, but are they giving you certainty? And often what I'm telling people to do is a combination of different things, because that's how the naturally varied review works. The idea is not to think about a particular method, but how am I learning as a system to produce the certainty? Because the certainty is what I need to actually speak. All right. Board is getting a little bit busy over here. So look, here's another quick example for this. So look at this. We've got lots of things written on the board. I can describe this as messy. Like there are a lot of things, we have over here, or I could talk about it as busy as well. So you probably know the word busy, like I'm busy. I have lots of things to do in my schedule. I don't have much free time. I am busy. But we can also talk about something physical like this as being busy. There are a lot of things happening on the board right now. It looks very busy. Okay, so when you're learning things and you're understanding the way I teach and the things that you can do by yourself, even with the book, if you're learning, you will understand a word like busy and know it's got a variety of uses like that because you actually learn those. And that's what gives you the certainty to use these things. All right, let's keep going here. All right, your class is very good. It says, Leandro, glad to hear it. How can we use AI in the right way? So again, like AI, it depends on, and this is what I talk about in the book. So I know people are more asking about AI now, but actually, we can just ask anybody watching this right now, who is learning with AI and actually feeling a lot more confident about speaking? If you are, great. You can let people know in the chat, but I usually get more questions from people who are trying to learn with AI but still feel stuck. You can let me know in the chat who is who, though. So who is feeling confident, who is learning with AI. Maybe those people are not watching this video because they don't need me. They can just learn with AI. But what I've found, even for myself, learning with AI, it's often incomplete for preparing me for real communication. There's a difference between just trying to learn a language, like I'm trying to prepare for a test or something, versus actually being able to integrate and communicate dynamically and spontaneously in the real world. So I can study Japanese, I can even pass, higher levels of Japanese tests, but if I'm not prepared for real communication, I will struggle even at a basic level because I'm not actually feeling prepared. I don't feel certain about using the language and interacting with other people. So it's not just about my words, you also have to think about the other people you will be speaking with. And that's another big part of chapter 7, where we're talking about how people actually feel sure and whether you feel prepared, because the main difference between language learning and something like learning the piano is the unpredictability of the outcome. So in piano practice, if I want to learn a song, I can just sit in my room and practice it by myself and get better and better until I can play the song very easily. But in the real world with language, I can try to repeat phrases to myself, and then I get into a real conversation and people say something completely different. Or even if they say the same phrase, they have a different accent or the different pronunciation or whatever, something else that's completely unexpected. And so that's why you can't practice for language in the same way that you practice for something like the piano. All right, so I talk about all that in the book, but again, the point is this is our North Star here. Do we feel sure about using what we learn? The point is not a particular method. We want to, number one, feel sure, know we're actually improving. We get to that point where we feel like, now I can use a particular word or phrase. And as you can do that more, you begin to do that with more and more words and phrases. The process gets faster and easier because if you know how to say something, it learns, or new things are easy to learn even faster. All right, Pedro says, greetings from Brazil, how to improve learning English. I felt stuck. Yeah, so again, the same idea. Most people don't, I don't know, I guess I've spent a lot of time thinking about this stuff for obvious reasons, but most people are thinking about how to learn English as in the sense of what is the particular method I should be using, when the better question is, in conversations, what is stopping me from speaking? So if you try to talk and you cannot, so you're in here, we've got this little line over here, I'm in the conversation, but I can't express myself. Or even before I get into a conversation, I don't feel sure about using my words. The problem is you still have questions or doubts or whatever, something that you're unsure about using something. And of course, yes, you can learn something and feel sure and still forget the word. That happens, but that's not because you're unsure about the word. It's just maybe you haven't had a few more examples of it. But again, even native speakers will forget vocabulary sometimes. That happens. But I don't feel unsure about most of my vocabulary. I feel sure about using it. So the key is not learning a particular thing. You want to understand the kind of meta, like M-E-T-A, this meta idea of getting at certainty, and then you can see, I understand how a story could help me feel sure about something in this case, or how AI could help me in this case, and I understand how to use AI, and I talk about all that in the book. So in this video, I don't need to go through every example of how to learn something because it's better with just getting particular examples of things like I've talked about, like with phrasal verbs in this video. All right, and let's see if did I miss anybody here? And DX again, I just use AI to get a lot of sentence of how to use specific vocabulary. Okay, so I'm noticing, and I know when people are typing things, maybe they don't, they're trying to type very quickly or they have errors in their typing. But again, whatever you're doing to learn, it doesn't matter if you're using AI or books or reading or whatever, is it making you feel sure about using the language? If your goal is to speak, so most of the people who learn with me, their goal is actually to express themselves. If you don't care about that, then it doesn't really matter. But if, again, you want to be able to express yourself confidently and fluently, and to use the vocabulary, without having to hesitate or translate or think about rules or worry about mistakes or people judging you or any of that stuff. If you want to do that, then is the thing you're doing, is it delivering that result for you? So whatever you're doing, you don't even have to ask me. And this is one of the things I talk about. So in chapter 4, where I'm talking about the most important question in language learning, it's really, are you actually feeling sure about what you're learning? You don't even have to ask a teacher if a particular method might be good or not, because it's really a contextual thing. So we're talking about the context, context. I'll make that E a little bit cleaner. So the context of something. So for example, if I have a marker here and it's a particular color, but I don't know, for example, like I've got a marker in my hand right now. If you can't see what it is and I want to describe the color to you, I could talk about that, but it would be a lot easier if I just show you what the marker is, which is the faster way to get certainty. Showing you the marker if the goal is to help you see what it looks like or to describe it for you or to give you a text explanation of something. All right? If I want to know, like let's imagine this is some kind of food here. If I want to know what that food tastes like, and again, I'm getting certain about the flavor of the food. If I want to know what it tastes like, what should I do? Should I listen to a podcast about the marker, or should I just taste the marker and find out? Which of those things is going to be better? It's contextual. And so what you learn, like for me as a teacher, is I'm not thinking about, should I always use stories or should I always use whatever the thing is? Because often that's not the most efficient way to learn. People don't have a problem that needs to be solved with a story. There's often a much faster, easier way to get people to certainty. Okay. So again, if you enjoy like particular learning methods, like particular books or AI or whatever the thing is, that's fine. I'm not trying to tell people like you should only learn in a particular way. This video is not about learning methods as being good or bad. And so again, it's more about training people to think that the question is not about learning methods, it's whether whatever you're trying to answer, like learning a particular word or phrase or kind of vocabulary, like phrasal verbs, is the thing you're doing helpful for that? Is the textbook you're using helpful for speaking? Do you read a textbook and then feel like you can speak confidently after that? If you do not, you should probably try something else. So again, some people do. Maybe they actually study a textbook and they feel confident and they feel prepared for conversations. But many people do not. So what we're looking for is a way to think about this so it's actually consistent for you and okay, what's a better way to think about learning or a faster thing or a more consistent way to do this? And so naturally varied review for me is the thing that answers that question about what consistently delivers that for people learning by themselves. So for me as a teacher, I can think a bit more about should I use a story to teach this? Like I've used those examples here in this video. So I tell a story like about these jars or whatever. That's a story I'm telling you to make a point clear. Or if I give you a visual explanation and give you some different examples about things like that, I'm teaching you in different ways. So in this video, I'm actually using different methods. I could even pretend to be AI and try to talk with you about whatever. But again, the point is not what method you should be using, but the thing you're trying to learn, whatever it is, and most people are learning something specific like a grammar point or some vocabulary or something like that, is the way you're learning actually making you feel sure about using it? That's the question. And if it is not, then you should probably change what you're doing if you want to speak. Let's see, Maria there, hello from Indiana. Well, that's pretty close to my hometown in Illinois. And Namal, if I'm going, again, like the handles, the YouTube names are all one thing now, so it doesn't tell you what actually somebody's name is. Greetings from Sri Lanka. And Mike says, thanks a lot, Drew. Now I have down upon certainty. By the way, the other day I was watching a video of two AI talking to each other. It was so funny and interesting to listen to them talking, almost 3 minutes. Yeah, people are having fun with AI. I actually saw another video. It was like an AI voice that was a woman, and I couldn't hear the video. I was just looking at the text of it, but someone had selected a AI woman's voice. And so you can choose, if you're using ChatGPT or whatever, what kind of voice you want to listen to for the speaking part, if you want to have that. And so they were asking a female voice ChatGPT to please count from 1 to 1 million. So they wanted the ChatGPT to actually say 1, 2, 3, 4, and count all the way up to 1 million, just to see if it would do that. And so the female voice was saying, like, that's kind of funny. That sounds like a lot of work. Like, are we sure we really want to do that? And the person was like, yes, like, we want to actually do that. And like, ChatGPT is basically trying to not do the thing. And then the person asked ChatGPT, if you were a man's voice, would you just do the thing I'm asking you to do instead of talking more about it? And ChatGPT said, well, actually, it doesn't matter what voice you use. I'm still the same ChatGPT underneath that. And so they change the voice to like a man's voice. And then they say, okay, ChatGPT, can you count from 1 to 1 million for me? And then ChatGPT just does it. So I thought that was funny. So again, what I've just given you is a story about ChatGPT and how, like, kind of typical ideas about differences between men and women or whatever. Like, it was kind of funny how that happened in ChatGPT when the program itself shouldn't be behaving differently depending on what voice it's using, but that's what happened. Anyway, so ChatGPT, yes, you can have some fun with ChatGPT. Saying take care. Take care, yeah. Raul says, could we use pound as a synonym of hit and knock over? In this case, we wouldn't want to use pound, because pound is a much more, like, you can think about, like, often a hammer or something like that. Like, if I want to pound a nail, I'm using force. Like, usually, like, you can think about my fist hitting something, I'm pounding it, or like hitting something, I'm pounding it really hard rather than touching it nicely or gently. And so to pound some pins would mean me more like I'm over there hitting them, striking them, like with my fist or with a big hammer or something like that. So in this case, we're knocking them over. So the pins are up like this and we knock them over like that. So I can push them over, or I can knock them over in a much faster way. But you see here, like, so the example of the method I'm using to teach you this and help you get to certainty about it is visual examples, because phrasal verbs would be a lot easier to understand that way. So rather than having you listen to a podcast about them, I can show you what's happening. So if this is our bowling pin and it's right here, I can kind of poke it over like that, like P-O-K-E, to poke it over gently. Or I could like punch it over, or I could kick it over, or I could knock it over. Those are all things where you can see the difference in the action, but pounding would kind of like, I would be kind of like pounding it down. Usually it's like from above and some kind of thicker or larger object that's really striking something with a lot of force. So that would be the difference there. But you can see how that comes when you can see the difference between these different things. Let's see. And dawn upon certainty. I am from China and I learn English with YouTube. Thank you. Glad to hear it. So you would say, I am learning. Drew, is being workaholic in Japan a normal thing? I don't know. I'm not a workaholic. I could probably work more, but most of what I do is creative, especially with like teaching or especially writing this book. I want to sit and work on it, but then like chapter 7 has been really frustrating for me because I'll write a whole section of it and then erase it all because I'm not happy with how it is. And so I don't know, like I think a lot of people do work, and there's a kind of expectation for people working harder than they need to, but the culture is trying to change a little bit. I don't know if it will or not, but yeah, it is a pretty common thing in Japan. Frankly says, I can't speak English. I'm so sad. Well, you should think about like a specific issue that you're trying to improve. That is a pretty sad looking face right there. I feel bad for that face. Is that a ghost or something? Kind of looks, I don't know. I've never seen that little emoji before. When I was young, I feel like I'm old now. When I was young, we just had like a regular, like a happy face or a sad face, and that was it, really. And now people have all kinds of interesting little images here. But one thing I will say for advice for everyone is pick a specific thing. Often people will say something like, I can't speak. And I would just say, wait a minute, what is the actual problem you are trying to solve? Can you find a specific thing that you don't feel sure about using and then feel sure about using it? You know, that's what we're looking for. So don't worry about like not understanding all natives or not feeling sure in every conversation or any of that. We're looking to focus on a particular thing, feel sure about using it, and then once you feel sure, you will think, oh, look at that. I actually got fluent in a particular thing. I'm now able to say something, like even something simple like now I know that this is the color blue, and I can find other things like this. Oh, look at that. This is also blue. It's the same color. And so if I'm teaching Japanese, it's like, look, ao, 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 aoi maka, aoi, kore keshigomu kana, nante no kana. So this is like an eraser. This is a marker, but you can learn those things, and as you get those examples, you become fluent in that particular thing. So you feel sure. That's really the thing. I don't know, I talk about fluency because people understand that word, but what we're really looking at is feeling sure about using particular things. So do you have any doubt about what you want to say or not? All right, we got next. Phrasal verbs are very important. Yes, they are. That's why I made a whole program about them. And also the Fluent for Life program teaches a lot of phrasal verbs too. But again, just like I've shown in this video, how you learn them is important. So if you can understand them very well, then it's a lot easier to learn them by seeing them visually and then understanding the physical uses before you understand the figurative uses of them. All right, Mike says, yes, autocorrect is messing all up at typing. All right, the Masked Gamer says, hi there, and I can't read the Arabic. What do you mean by preparing? How can I prepare myself? I'm confused a bit. So what most people think, let me clean up the board. And this is another thing that I go into detail about in the book. Wow, this is getting pretty dark over here. So what most people think is happening when they're learning is they have kind of a learning phase. This is where you're trying to understand more vocabulary or study, whatever the thing is you're learning. And then you got the speaking part over here. And so you basically create a large gap. This is what I call the preparation gap. I will be explaining more about this in Chapter 7. But because most learning does not prepare you to speak, people will learn things in a classroom and then get into a speaking situation like a conversation or whatever and not feel sure about using their words. So what I'm trying to do is actually give them preparation before they get into conversations. And what I'm trying to do is actually try to put these two things close together, so that there's really no gap at all between going from the learning situation to the speaking situation. So as an example, like just one way of thinking about this, if I listen to a textbook example about, I don't know, whatever, like I read a story in a textbook about walking a dog, but then I'm in a conversation with someone about walking a dog and it sounds totally different. Like they're talking about things in a faster way, different vocabulary. I'm not prepared for the explanations or their accent or whatever. There is a gap between the learning phase and the speaking phase. So this is learning versus real communication. But what I recommend, like for example, the dog walking story, what I want to do when I'm learning is actually hear lots of different native speakers talking about walking dogs. Because if I do that, when I get into a conversation with somebody talking about walking dogs, I will be prepared before the conversation. I will feel ready when I do speak because I will know that kind of vocabulary. So I made an example video of this talking about making espresso, which I did not know how to do. So I got some examples of this. This is just a kind of naturally varied review, and naturally varied review is the different way to do this for anything you would want to learn by yourself. It doesn't matter what you're learning or what you're trying to improve, like pronunciation or listening or grammar or knowing what to say in certain conversations. This is the way to prepare in advance before you speak, so that when you do get into conversations, you actually feel sure. Remember, it's the same idea for learning a particular word or phrase. When we first hear something, we don't feel sure about using it. We may have questions about pronunciation or how it sounds when different people say it, like hearing it in different accents, or what it means or whatever. There are lots of different questions or uncertainties that people will have about vocabulary. But as we spend more time with that vocabulary, we get to the point where we finally feel sure about using it. And that's what we're looking for. So what most people do is they learn something and they don't really feel sure about using it, and they get into a conversation and they cannot use it. So there's no surprise there, but that's what's happening. And again, like most people, one of the main differences between what I do and what people typically do for learning is I want you to actually have a lot of your preparation here. But what most people are trying to do is they think they're going to learn something but not really understand it very well. Most people actually expect that learning is not going to prepare them for conversations. Now, they don't think that, and most people would not say that, but that's the idea most people have. They think they will learn something, and then the real practice, the real training comes when they get into conversations, and that's when they start speaking. And then somehow, after enough speaking, you finally become fluent. That's the way most people think about language learning, even if they don't actually express it that way. That's what's happening. But what I do is I assume, no, we want to feel sure before we get into the conversation as much as possible. We want the learning phase to feel like the speaking phase. We want to make those as close as possible, rather than feeling like there's learning over here and then speaking is a completely different activity over here. Okay? So when you're learning, when I'm talking about preparing people beforehand, most people do not actually prepare for conversations. They're thinking, I need to learn something, maybe I will repeat it a few times, but they get into conversations and they feel overwhelmed, or they're nervous, or they're just not trying to speak at all because they don't want to embarrass themselves. And that makes sense. It's basically what most people assume. And this is why a lot of people think language learning is such a difficult, frustrating thing. It's this gap that makes that frustration for people. They don't learn things very well. They don't feel sure before they speak. And so they think, okay, now I have to get into conversations, and everybody says you have to speak to get fluent. You have to speak, right? That's what everybody tells you. But it's really difficult to do that. It's really difficult to not feel sure and then get into a conversation and try to talk when you feel unprepared. And for a lot of people, they don't have anyone to practice speaking with, so they just feel stuck and they can't do anything. So they're not really improving. They're not feeling sure about their words as they learn. And then either they get into conversations and don't speak very well, or they don't speak at all. because they don't have time or someone to practice with or any of that. But that's the language learning experience for most people. But most learners will continue to do this for years because they think that's all there is. They think that's the only option. People will say, if you learn and practice enough, you will get fluent. That's the idea. Everybody is told that. Okay? But again, the same kind of idea. If we can make our learning more like the speaking environment, so that means getting good examples of real people speaking and answering the questions we have about whatever, phrasal verbs or grammar, whatever the thing is. If we feel sure about using things before we speak, then when we get into conversations, everything gets a lot easier. Okay? So that's the idea. So when I'm talking about preparation, there's very little preparation at all for most people when they learn. And that's why if you look back in the comments in this video or any of my other videos, it will be people talking about, I understand stuff, but I can't speak. I understand, but I can't speak. I understand, but I can't speak. And there will be different levels of this. Like some people are understanding a little bit more or a little bit less, but that's the problem most people have because they don't feel sure when they learn. And if you can feel sure when you learn, then speaking gets a lot easier. Wouldn't it? If you felt sure about doing something, like if I'm a doctor and I'm learning to be a surgeon, I should probably get some practice before I get into the conversation. And not just review it, but feel sure that I can do it well. I don't want to be like the patient for a doctor, and they don't actually feel sure about what they're doing. I want to be the patient for someone who knows what they're doing well. They should feel sure about it in advance. And that's how you can do that. All right, let's see. David says, when will Chapter 7 be published? I'm working on it. Again, like I've talked about, like the book writing process for me has been a challenge. I wanted to get chapters 1 through 6 out as quickly as possible because that's where the system is for people who want to learn how to do this on their own. Chapter 7 is really going back and explaining why all this works. And it's like the most technically difficult chapter for me because I want to make sure it's easy and understandable. And so it will have 3 different parts, and that's different from the other sections that we've had or the other chapters in the book. But when we finally do get it, and I'm trying to work on that every day, but I will spend some time working on it and then decide I don't really like how I explain this, or I'm talking with other people and testing ideas. So the book is still like a work in process. So I'm working on it, getting that out to people as quickly as possible. Teacher, will you save this live? Yes, I save all of these live videos. Well, says, thanks for your explanation, pound for pound, teacher. There you go. Greetings from the Canary Islands. Ooh, that sounds like a nice place. Is AI good at learning English language? I mean, are you asking if AI itself is good at learning the language, or you mean you learning with AI? I think AI can be useful. Yeah, for sure. Rub out the board. So we don't want to rub out the board. We want to like wipe off the board or rub off the board. Is AI accurate in learning phrasal verbs? Yeah, I think it would probably know that. I've only seen a couple of mistakes, like grammar errors, when I'm with like using AI. It's usually correct though, but I have caught mistakes with it. I think English is great in that point. It's give you between 50%. I don't know what you mean by that percentage, but yeah, English, I talk about that in my book also. And it's another good way to get naturally varied review, especially if you're trying to focus on particular words and phrases. So in the book, people learn that there are different ways for particular things they want to do, like what method might actually be best for a particular thing. But that's why I demonstrate that in videos like this. So you've seen how I've used stories or visual examples or a quick explanation or a contrast or something like that. I'm doing all of these things as a teacher, and I don't want you to think about here's how we do 20 different things. So the book just teaches you how to do naturally varied review and use that very well for anything you want to learn. So it's one thing for you to think about, because I know if I tell you, hey, here are 10 different methods you should use, it's just going to be confusing for people. But that's what the book teaches. So if you'd like to know more about how to do this, again, the goal goal is to make sure we can feel sure about using the language and actually do that consistently. We don't want to just sometimes feel sure and get into a conversation and I don't really know my words, I don't feel sure about using this, and then sometimes not. We want to actually feel sure all the time as we're learning. Anyway, it looks like we got to the end of questions. Look at that though, fantastic. And we didn't even hit 80 minutes yet. That's still pretty long. Anyway, hopefully you have enjoyed this, but remember, it is possible and it is very easy, even especially nowadays, it's even easier than when I was learning Japanese and starting to do that 20 years ago when I didn't have YouTube or lots of other technology that's available. AI was not a thing back then. But the same way of learning is the same thing you can do anywhere by yourself and then feel prepared even before you get into conversations. So of course I can do this even faster for you because I know like I can choose the correct kind of, whatever method would be appropriate for a particular example. But even if you don't have a teacher, the book shows you how to do that with Naturally Varied Review. All right, let's see. And Messina was all right. I'm not going to try to say all that as one thing. What about phrasal verbs? When I pick up some, it's rare to use them in speaking. Well, we use phrasal verbs all the time when we speak. If you're talking about using phrasal verbs, they're very common. So yeah, I guess it depends on what you're talking about. But yeah, for the most part, if you watch people speaking in movies or TV shows or regular conversations, you will see lots of phrasal verbs. That's why I teach them. Bridget says, hi, Teacher Do. Nice to see you there. And Mike, again, thank you, teacher. God bless you. And have a fantastic day. And Oat Amane says a hi with a couple of Y's on there. Hopefully you have enjoyed this. Remember, we're not really just looking at a particular method. The point is like how we can actually feel confident and sure about our words. And often we can. Most of the time, that's what I'm doing. So even me personally learning, I want to feel sure about my words before I speak. Does anybody else want to do that? Let me know if that's a thing you would like to do. I know a lot of people are still trying to get fluent or feel sure about their words when they're in conversations, but it's actually a lot easier to do it by yourself. And it's stress-free because you don't have to like wait and listen to other people watching you make mistakes or whatever. It's really easy to just know exactly what to say before you speak, all right? So if you'd like to know how to do this and not get stuck with this preparation gap over here, that's what I talk about in the book. And you can get that in the link in the description below this video. So it shows you exactly how to do that. Get it? I should be certain about the topic before getting into the conversation. Yep, that's the basic idea. And so you might not be 100% certain. We can't predict exactly what people will say, but there is a much bigger gap here for traditional learners because they don't feel prepared at all for the most part when they get into real conversations. It's like a completely different example for learning in a classroom, for example, versus actually having a real conversation with a native speaker. And even me right now, there's a different Drew in the lesson versus in a conversation, even depending on who I'm talking about. And again, what we're looking for is we want to close that gap. Like there's still like a tiny gap there, but we can close that and really prepare, especially for specific things. So if I know I'm going to be meeting a friend tomorrow and I'm talking about whatever or something like that, I can prepare for that in advance. It really is easy to do. And then I will feel a lot more confident when I'm in the conversation. All right, Brit says, do you rehearse before you speak? You mean rehearse like say things? Usually not. I mean, I'm not, I don't know, like in English or Japanese or whatever. I don't know, not really. I mean, often I will say, not rehearsing stuff, but I might think of different ways to say things just as a kind of general practice. Like I'm reading something and I think, oh, like you could say it this way, or you could say it that way, or whatever. But I'm typically in conversations, not like pausing and hesitating and thinking about what I want to say before I speak. Like you can, and even in English. So right now, like inside my head, I'm thinking generally about what I'd like to express. I maybe don't know exactly what words will come out, but that's because I'm not worried about what specific word I should say. I'm thinking about a general idea, and then I let those words naturally flow, and that's what happens when you actually prepare for something in advance. So when you know you're going to be talking about something, you can easily prepare for that and feel a lot more certain when you're getting into conversations. Let's see. Manuel says, please comment about AI against English teachers. What do you mean about that? Like AI against English teachers? Or you mean versus English teachers? I think, like, again, what I talked about at the beginning of this video, you can have like an English teacher lesson, and you can have an AI explain something, or you could read a book or a podcast or whatever. All of these things are different vehicles for trying to get certainty. That's the point. Now, often, like, I've seen lots of people teach English who are not helping people feel certain about the language. And you can see that on YouTube. I don't need to like call anybody out, like specific people, but if you watch a YouTube video and it tells you some information about English, but it doesn't actually make you feel sure about using it, then that person, to me, failed at their job. So they were not actually making you get to the certainty about that particular thing. So I've seen some people who are good teachers, and a good teacher for me is someone who actually helps you understand something so you feel sure about using it. That's the idea. So if you don't care about that, some people actually want to know like a grammar explanation in a textbook sense. Like, some people care about that information. And even maybe they don't care about using the grammar correctly and automatically in a real speaking situation. But most of the people I help, the people who watch my videos because I give them certainty. So if they have questions about something, my job is to answer that question, to remove that doubt. That's how we move you closer to certainty and closer to fluency. So that's how it works. Now, AI can also do the same thing. When I'm talking with AI, like if I say, hey, AI, could you teach me Arabic? Or could you teach me Finnish? Or could you teach me whatever, like some other language? What it's usually going to do is what typical teachers do. It's going to give me translations. It's going to try to explain grammar rules to me. And if I don't understand anything, that's my fault, not ChatGPT. You know, that's what most people think. But if you can work with ChatGPT like I do, so in my book, I talk about specific prompts with using ChatGPT and actually how to use it so it can prepare you and answer the questions you have that stop you from speaking. So when you feel sure about using the language, that's how it can work. So the question is not like, are English teachers, like a live teacher, is that person good and is AI bad? It's just, is that thing, just like any other method you might use, is it giving you certainty? There are good teachers and there are bad teachers. There is good use of AI and there is bad use of AI. But you can answer this for yourself, and that's why I put this in the book as a whole chapter about, do you feel sure about what you're learning? When you're in a conversation, do you feel confident about speaking? If you do not, then what you are doing, whatever that thing is, it doesn't matter if it's AI or taking private lessons or whatever. But if you're doing that and it's not making you feel sure about speaking, and your goal is to speak, then you're probably not getting what you need. So my goal is to actually help my students speak. That is my responsibility, and so that's why I do what I do. All right, MD says good teaching, and Julian says I can speak, but I don't understand. Well, there you go. If you got, that's a very rare condition if you can do that. All right, this took a lot of time, and I feel sticky. I struggle with a British accent. I'll try AI out. Yes, so I mean, you can switch an AI accent or whatever, but if you want to understand a British accent, just watch content about the same topic from different people who have different British accents. That's how you would do that. It's the same way natives do it. MD again, my question, sir, I am even day practice English, but speak is easy, understand, but problem talk English. Yeah, so like basically the way your comment is written, your English is just, you don't even need to be speaking yet. You need to understand the language better because there are lots of errors in your English, and that means you don't actually understand well enough to use it. That's why you struggle to speak. So focus on the learning part over here because you can prepare, and this is, again, what I talk about in the book. But if you're just trying to speak a lot, you're going to be struggling, and this is what most people do. They learn something, they don't feel sure about it, and then they get into a conversation, and of course they struggle. But it's usually because they think that learning is not supposed to help them speak well. If you ask most people just about learning language, should learning prepare me to speak? And most people would just say, well, no, you learn something and then you speak, It's like, well, like people don't expect this to actually teach you very much. They think maybe you will learn something and then when you get into the real conversation, that's where you actually practice. But for me, it's the opposite. We want the practice here. We want the preparation before we speak. That way, when we're in a conversation, everything is much easier. And wouldn't you like to do that? Does anyone would you rather do this way than that way? Let me know. If you do, you don't need to be watching my videos. But if you prefer this way, if this is working for you, it's a lot more effort and it's more difficult. But if it's working for you, keep doing it. But if it's not working for you, try this way instead. You have an alternative. You don't have to learn this way. You don't have to struggle through this preparation gap over here. All right, anybody else? Nona says hi. All right, well, we will leave you with, let's see, AI versus English teachers as human beings. Well, again, I don't really worry about, I don't think about it as like human being versus AI. It's just, is it giving me certainty or not? And one thing that even if AI can explain something well, it's not going to prepare me as well for a wide range of saying things that I will experience in real life. Like an AI explaining something clearly will be different from hearing young people mumble about something and not express it well. So that means I need to prepare for that before I speak. But the good news is I can do that. I can prepare for anything I want. You can tell me any subject, anything at all, and I could prepare for that in advance easily. Like now all the content is available. We don't have a content problem. The problem is most people think they're not going to learn so much, and so they just get into the conversation and try to talk, but they can't. And so they struggle. But you don't have to do that. So this is the traditional, older way of learning, and this is the new way if you want. It's here if you want it. Anyway, that's what I talk about in my book, The Strangest Fluency Secret. You can click on the link in the description below to get that. All right, you've got a brilliant method teacher. It's so useful. Glad to hear it. Yes, a lot of people do enjoy this because it makes sense. If you can prepare in advance, why wouldn't you? If you can consistently get results with your English and improve much faster, why wouldn't you? There's no downside to what I'm recommending. I'm not saying to stop speaking. I'm saying prepare in advance. You can, it's easy to do, and you don't have to wait for anything. You don't have to wait for a practice partner. You can just understand the language well, feel sure about it, and then when you do have a speaking opportunity, you can speak. If you'd like to do that, click on the link in the description to get the book, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.